Hello, everyone. This is Serena and Ari with Shattering the Matrix. Today, we are very honored to have Kevin Annett as our distinguished guest. Kevin is the present Field Secretary for the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State, ITCCS, award-winning documentary filmmaker called Unrepented of 2007, and author, education, BA Anthropology, University of British Columbia. Kevin has established the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State, Dublin, with 6 other organizations. He has led public protests and exorcisms at the Vatican and is endorsed by Radical Party and other politicians. There is a lot more that Kevin has done, but I will let him do the talking from this point on. So, Kevin, welcome to our show, and tell me, please, how you are and what are the latest events in your world.
Thanks, Serena. It's really good to be with you. These days, things are developing so quickly that it's hard to keep track. We're a grassroots organization, and so we don't have the means often to follow up on just the tremendous response from people all over the world. Let me say, first of all, though, that from the 6 groups originally, we've now expanded into 21 countries. There's groups now working with us largely on 2 issues having to do with survivors of Catholic Church abuse, attempts to go beyond just court resolution to actually changing the system that's causing this abuse. And the other issue, of course, is modern-day child trafficking, especially within the government systems. And this is involving a case recently, which has been on our website, itccs.org. And it involves a case of a man called Steve Finney and his wife Amy in Kitchener, Ontario. About almost 10 days ago now, Steve was arrested by police, held at gunpoint, held without charge for 3 days in prison. And the judge told him that he could only be released on bail if he disavowed any connection to our tribunal. So it's clearly political persecution.
Right.
We fortunately got him out of jail after contacting the Ontario Attorney General's office. But it shows the extent to which people in power now are very concerned about the witnesses coming forward and naming what's really going on. And it also shows, however, how we can, by mobilizing the community, stop these kind of tactics by the government and others. So, we're quite pleased with that, and it's really converging with other things that have been going on all over the world, where more and more survivors are coming forward to name these crimes.
That is, I'm glad to hear it. Kevin, can you just go back and backtrack a little bit, because I want people to know that your documentary is very important and it's very clear what has been going on. So can you talk a little bit about your documentary, Unrepentant?
Yeah, it was made about 6 years ago now, and what it involves is the story of how about 20 years ago, I first, as a United Church clergyman on the west coast of Canada, I began to encounter stories from Aboriginal people there about their friends and relatives who had been killed or died in the local Indian boarding school. And it tells my story, but also eyewitness accounts of many of these crimes that had never been documented before in Canada, and they still aren't. To a large degree, the government and churches are still concealing a lot of this stuff, right, especially when it involves, murdered children. We know that from government documents, over 50,000 children never came back, where they averaged a death rate of over 40% over half a century in these schools. Now, that enormous death rate is not accidental. It was a result of deliberate depopulation methods they used, especially spreading disease among children and never treating them. We've proven all that. All of that evidence is up online. We actually conducted a common law court case into that this past year and found the Pope and various other parties guilty of crimes against humanity. Right. And it was interesting because that same month we did that, the Pope stepped down. And we know it was definitely connected to that. Yeah.
We absolutely noticed that. Yeah, go ahead.
So the film was kind of a real icebreaker in Canada. It's the first time that anyone really talked about these things, and it won a lot of awards outside Canada, but never within the country. It's kind of on the blacklist of in official circles. But nevertheless, we're actually planning a sequel to it called Unrelenting. which looks into how this stuff is carrying on, but also how more people are coming forward to name these things. So, we're very pleased. Yeah.
I'm so glad to hear that. That's wonderful. Now, you mentioned a couple of recent events that are taking place here now. Can you talk about those that you just mentioned before?
Well, there was a very important. Yeah, there was a very important event that happened on September 22nd on the equinox in Rome, and it followed up on the first public service I held there in October 2009, which developed into kind of a symbolic exorcism at the Vatican. And there were 9 elders from different countries who came to the Vatican on September 22nd. And what they did is they issued something they called the Jubilee Declaration, which is really a statement that it's time for people within the church to leave and to not be associated anymore with a criminal body that is guilty of all of these horrible things. And in response, it's been really interesting. We even have within Ireland, there's a group of Catholic priests who have already responded to that and have left the church in the sense of disaffiliating from Rome, which is quite something to have occurred in Ireland. It's kind of like what we saw during the Reformation, where people were within their own countries were breaking ties with the Vatican, and very critical of the corruption there. And so it was really gratifying to see that, and we know this is spreading more and more.
That is amazing. There was another event that you mentioned that you wanted to talk about that took place recently. Can you do that now?
Oh, do you mean the one with Steve Finney in Kitchener? I think.
That is the one.
Well, a little bit more detail on that. I did mention it briefly, but Steve and Amy are 2 people in Kitchener whose child was taken from them by what's called the Children's Aid Society, which is actually a private organization that makes about $100,000 from the government for every child they seize. So it's they have an economic motive in grabbing children all the time, and they do it on a very flimsy excuse. In the case of Steve and Amy, they took their child simply because Steve had a juvenile delinquency record 15 years previously. And so they just took Amber. In response, Steve and Amy have been very active in the community, trying to rally parents, and also, which was quite something, they took our material, and especially the declaration that the Crown of England had lost its lawful jurisdiction in Canada because it's guilty of these crimes against humanity. We're just quoting international law saying that a criminal body didn't have the right to have legal authority over others. Steve went into the courts in Kitchener and said that. He said he didn't recognize the Crown Court jurisdiction. He felt that his daughter had been illegally kidnapped, and that's one of the reasons they grabbed him and held him in prison and tried to intimidate him into disaffiliating from our tribunal. I mean, it was a clear political persecution. Right. And these kinds of things are happening more and more as people confront the system. That's clearly trafficking children for money. I got several calls this week from people in America as well who have exactly the same stories, and so this is one of the issues that we're really kind of documenting and focusing on now.
Why do you think this is happening with the children? How do these people think that they are self-authorized to go and take these children from their own parents? I mean, how does this even happen?
Well, the short answer is they're authorized by the government to do that. They have unlimited authority to use any force necessary to take children if they believe that children's somehow at risk. No, but I mean, in reality, they don't have to show any evidence at all. Like in the case of Steve and Amy, they never showed cause for why Amber had to go. They made a reference to the fact that Steve had a juvenile delinquency record, but no evidence that there was any kind of recent incident endangering Amber or any of that. They didn't have to justify how they did it before a judge. They had carte blanche to simply do that. So in practice, the system is really out of control, and it's not really accountable to anyone, because you see that the judges continually collude in this. And so this is, what happens when you have these, well, in Canada especially, you don't really have checks and balances. You don't have a judiciary that's independent from the government. The judges are all appointed by the Crown. They take an oath of loyalty to the very body that was responsible for the death of all these children in residential schools. So, I mean, that's part of the problem.
Kevin, if I may, I'm sorry. This is Ari. I just wanted to ask, just expand a little bit on what you're saying here. I think I heard you say that, of course, the parents are apparently not doing things according to, what the government wants. So the children are really at risk, and they're either, being accused of, parents are being accused of being drug, related, having drug incidents or whatever other type of incidents. So they're basically targeting these parents so they can get to these children. Now, so they get to the children, and the point is to traffic them for what? For sexual purposes, or is it more like child slavery or other purposes? Do you know?
Well, all of that has been going on. Definitely, there's child trafficking for sexual purposes, definitely within these systems. That's been documented in British Columbia really well, where I live. But generally, it's a profit motive. They make money by doing this. And there have been studies done in England and America showing that children that are taken and put in foster care are something like 60 to 80 times more likely to be sexually abused. If you're in the government system as a child, you're more likely to be abused than if you're with your own family. I mean, that's been proven quite definitively. So why would the government keep doing that? Why would they have a policy of paying foster parents double what a mother gets on welfare, a single mom? I mean, unless they're trying to, break up that family system. So, I mean, I'm sure there's other reasons, too. I know that in the residential school system, it was clear that the government had a plan to destroy the Aboriginal families in order to get lands and resources. I mean, that's written down. And they know the best way to traumatize people and make them obedient is to traumatize them at a young age as a child, to abuse them, and that, cripples people often for life.
Yeah. Right. Would they be taking those children also for satanic rituals?
Well, we've begun to document that in some cases that does go on. There was we actually last month when I was in New York City held a joint meeting with members of SMART, which is a national organization of survivors of satanic abuse and government experimental programs. And Neil Brick, who was speaking at that conference, said that the satanic underworld is very extensive, and it's intergenerational in the sense that these are families that breed children for these purposes, and they often involve local police and people with influence, which is why it goes undetected.
Wow. That's just horrific. Oh, my goodness. Yeah. What I just wanted to also ask you, if you don't mind, in reference to the new Pope. What is your take on this new Pope?
Well, first of all, he was brought in to clean up the image of the Vatican, and he's doing a pretty good job of it. I mean, he's saying all the right words. His own personal history is no bed of roses. I mean, he's been accused by priests in Argentina of having actually done what the Catholic Church did all over the world, in that during the Dirty War in the 1970s and 80s, he not only turned a blind eye when his priests were being locked up and killed by the junta, but he actually was involved in networks that trafficked the children of political prisoners, and that actually occurred under Franco in Spain. Something like 500,000 children are now trying to sue the Spanish government for basically the children of these political prisoners were taken, put in Catholic homes, and brainwashed. And Jorge Bergoglio did that as a bishop in Argentina. Now he's Pope. So for him to talk about reform and human rights is kind of ironic. But he's also been named in court cases in Argentina as an accessory to these crimes during the Dirty War, where like over 30,000 people were killed. So I think he has a vested interest in making the Vatican look good. But so people know, on July 11th, he, in this so-called apostolic decree he issued, he affirmed the policy in the Catholic Church that leakage of information is a criminal offense. So if you're an honest priest and you report child abuse going on, you can go to jail now. You can go to a Vatican prison simply for leaking information. So, I mean, this is not reform by any stretch of the imagination,
Right. right?
Well, Kevin, I read something recently that said that he put out some, I don't know what they call it. They have their own levels of law and linguistics in their church. But he put out something in writing that said everyone was going to be accountable to the law, that they lifted the impunity that criminals had.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
They're accountable to their law. So it's kind of like the mafia getting together and saying, okay, we've got these internal rules of how you have to operate, and if you go outside the rules, you're punished. But it's not the law of the land; it's canon law. So it was a very tricky thing they did. Now this isn't surprising because he's a Jesuit, and they've mastered this technique over 400 years of dissimulation. Right. And okay, and what he said in the Apostolic Decree is that all of these international laws, like the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Genocide Convention, all these things that they considered themselves not under, okay, they now have assimilated those laws into canon law. So what that means is the church will decide whether or not to apply those laws to people within the church. They've just set themselves outside international law formally, okay. So, in other words, they can decide whether or not to prosecute their own kind. They're not accountable to any other body outside themselves. It's a way to re-entrench that whole attitude that the church is a law unto itself. I mean, that's in practice what's happening, despite all the rhetoric and how the media is falling all over them, making it look like he's the second coming of Christ. I mean, it's clearly damage control because of the enormity of what was coming out under the previous Pope Benedict, you know.
Right, yeah. I don't believe in coincidences. So when this Pope stepped down, just when you had been so active in all of those actions that you were taking to exorcise the Pope from his false authority, I knew that there was something going on there. And I wanted to ask you, these numbers that you just gave about how many children, 500,000 or 1 million, under this Pope that were trafficked. I mean, these numbers are public. This is public information. Why do people not look at this when you know all of these people who are standing in awe of this Pope and stand out there and cheer and love this man? Why aren't they looking at his history? I don't understand this.
Well, that's always the question, you know, why tyrants and people in power have such adulation from the very people they're harming. I mean, it has to do with a certain mass psychology where if people are brainwashed at a young enough age, they believe anything. But it's also the trauma involved. You know, there's a lot of programming that goes on. I mean, there's been some really good stuff written about the gestures that politicians and popes use whenever they're speaking publicly. You know, the raised hand. Kind of like the raised parental hand that might strike you unless you're a good child. You know, all of this stuff is triggering the way that we've been raised, and it's not accidental. You know that goes on. But on the other hand, a lot of people don't support this guy. A lot of Italians don't. You know, every time I go to Italy, I get people coming up to me saying how disgusted they are with the Vatican, but they're living under a regime where, to give you an example, in Italy, if there's a court case going on involving the Catholic Church, the judge cannot make a final ruling without consulting the local bishop. I mean, the church and the state are really one over there, and so people are intimidated. Okay, it's like living under a dictatorship. The only people you see on camera are the groupies, the people who like him. There's a lot of disaffection out there, and they knew that you know that this Pope was about to be. He faced he faced a warrant, an arrest warrant that was issued by a European government just 2 weeks before he resigned.
Which Pope was this? The one who
Pope Benedict, the one who stepped down, was actually facing arrest for these things. And there's whom? Even a group, well, it was a government in Europe who haven't disclosed yet what they're doing, so I'm not really at liberty to say which one. But it was a government that had been working with, partly with our information that we've been providing. There's two parties now, political parties in Italy, that have actually indicated that they want to work towards dissolving what's called the Lateran Treaty, which is the treaty that obligates the Italian government to support the Vatican. And if that happens, their whole deck of cards is going to fall because their legal protection would be gone. And that shows you the level of disaffection for parties in that, just like in Ireland, for the priests there to be breaking away. So it's a lot more shaky than the media is portraying it, or the Vatican's portraying it.
Wow, this is just unbelievable. This is huge. I can't wait for this to really fall down and become really public and something that the people just can't deny when they see it anymore.
No.
I really think that
How close are we for this to happen, Kevin? For this whole thing to collapse?
Well, I think it already has internally collapsed. Every time I go to Rome, first time I went, I had this sense that, I was going to be intimidated and overwhelmed just by being near the enormity of that kind of evil, But I stood there in St. Peter's Square, and I just felt there was nothing there. It felt like a big vacuum. And it really doesn't have a lot of substance. It's all show and pomp and pretense, and it's not. When you talk to the people within it, like I know Catholic priests all over the place who have absolutely no faith at all in Rome or any connection there. They're just they're doing what most clergy do, which is go through the motions for the sake of their pension. But when even bishops and cardinals are expressing disaffection with Rome, there's something in the works. I think it could be very soon. But the point is, they've got such an effective public relations operation, aided and abetted by media all over the world, that you don't see that if you're looking at the official sources, right?
Right. All people can see is the commercial.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what does that look
Kevin,
like? I'm sorry. Is that like a breaking away of? There's no more. Do you feel it's going to be no more Catholic religion, or is it no more centralized Catholic religion?
I'd say no more centralized Catholic religion. It's. I have a friend who's a priest in Quebec, and he has stopped sending money to Rome, and he's in trouble with his bishop. But, he said morally he couldn't really do it anymore because there's this policy they have called crimen solicitanus, and it orders every priest and bishop in the world to cover up child abuse or they'll be excommunicated. That's a crime. That's a criminal conspiracy to be telling priests to do that. And he can't stomach that anymore. But he says, you can be a Catholic without being a Roman Catholic, right? And that's kind of more and more the attitude that I'm finding.
Kevin, you're saying then that it is literally like verbally or written down, said or written by the leaders of the church that they are forbidden to discuss the sexual perversions that are taking place in the church.
That's right. It's a policy. There's a whole copy of it printed in our one of our websites. If you go to www.hiddennolonger.com, and then you go to Appendix 9, we've reprinted the whole law. It was leaked to a London newspaper about 10 years ago by somebody in the Vatican. It's called crimen solicitanus, and that's a Latin word meaning the crime of solicitation. It was first adopted in 1929, reaffirmed at Vatican II in the year 1962. It was drafted. The new version was drafted by Pope Benedict when he was a priest, Joseph Ratzinger, and it says that in paragraph 11 it says that, and it uses a lot of Catholic Church language. Like, for example, it says when these abuses are disclosed, the pontifical secret is imposed, which means it's like saying something in the confessional. You're not allowed to talk about it. And the crime, child abuse is not defined as a crime, but as a sin. What the crime is under canon law is to talk about it. It's kind of like the crime of omerta in the Sicilian mafia, right? If you talk, you're dead. It's the same attitude, and it's funny because when I was in Rome last time, one of the politicians I was speaking to said, "You got to understand, the government and the mafia and the Vatican, they're all the same people, and literally the same people." So it's not surprising that have that kind of policy. The crime is to talk about the church's dirty secrets, not the actual doing of that child abuse. So, that's
right.
what...
It's just a sin. It's just a sin to do it, which they can forgive themselves with 10 Hail Marys.
Right.
But
exactly.
It's a crime to talk about it.
That's right. And, we often handled material to families going into Catholic churches saying, you have to know that if your child is harmed here, the priest is under an obligation to the Pope to cover it up and not tell the police. What kind of organization could get away with having an official policy of aiding and abetting child rapists in their ranks?
A diabolical one.
Exactly.
That's all it is.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, exactly. How could it go on year after year, right?
Because of the blindness of people. This is what boggles the mind, that people are not looking at this closely enough.
Well, child abuse is a really hard issue for a lot of people to look at, maybe because of their own past, what they know. I mean, people automatically kind of veer away from it, I find, whenever I give talks or work with people. But you know what's really disturbing, too, is that not only is this stuff going on, but taxpayers are funding it. There's secret financial agreements between the Vatican and over 120 governments. They're called financial concordats. And it channels up to 5% of taxpayers' money directly to the Vatican Bank. And you know, people should contact their congressman or member of parliament or whoever and say, is there that kind of agreement between our government and the Vatican? Because I don't want my money sent to these criminals. You know, and that's a basic part of any law, common law, which is that people should not have to be associated with criminal activity. You know, citizens are not obligated to support criminals.
So who would they contact if they wanted to specifically stop sending money to the Vatican?
Well, they'd first of all find out from your government representative if there is such a thing. Now, they will probably not know that because these things are often secrets. But you could at least raise the issue and say, you know, actually there's a thing which helps us because it's called the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. And in Section 25, it says that under international law, if one's government is engaged in criminal activity or an illegal war or something like that, citizens are obligated not to pay taxes because there's nothing that compels you to support crimes of your own government under international law. So, I mean, when your government is funding child trafficking churches with your tax money, you are fully justified in withholding that tax money, and international law supports you in that. So you're not doing anything wrong.
Well, I encourage everybody to find out where their money is going if they possibly can. My God. Kevin, I wanted to ask you another question. We touched upon the fact that this Pope is a Jesuit. Can you talk about what a Jesuit is, what their training is, and who they are most loyal to?
The Jesuits are what they call the Society of Jesus. Was set up by a Spanish soldier in the 1540s, a guy called Ignatius Loyola. And Loyola was commissioned by the Pope to form a military society to crush the Reformation, to crush any... This has happened right in the 30 years after the Reformation began, and it was spreading like wildfire all over Europe. The Jesuits were set up to destroy every opponent of the Pope, including Protestants, humanists, liberals. Over the last 450 years, that's been their main job. Their main thrust has been towards co-opting and influencing political leaders all over the world, and also educating, setting up Jesuit-run universities. Now, in America alone, there's over 200 universities funded directly by the Jesuits. Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., which is the main think tank for the U.S. government, is Jesuit-run. You know, the Jesuits own Citibank of America. They have enormous financial assets, and they've been working consistently in a lot of movements to simply steer them away from criticism of Rome. I mean, their main purpose is to dissimulate and you know, kind of influence in that behind-the-scenes way. That, you know, the classic case in Canadian American history is the Jesuits were the ones who would go in whenever the English had alliances with various native nations and break up those alliances, fund the you know, and arm the other sides, foment civil war. You know, there's a long history of them doing that all over the world. So, I mean, no, they're a very dangerous organization, and yet they often appear in a very liberal, benign way. That's part of the image, right?
Right, and they are a military, are they not?
They are. Military and intelligence gathering is their main occupation, as well as, you know, the front operations is at various universities and think tanks and that they fund all over the world. But no, they help set up a thing called the Holy Alliance, which is the Vatican Assassination Bureau. The Holy Alliance was responsible for the poisoning of Pope John Paul I in 1978 because he had exposed the Vatican Bank There's a good book about this called In God's Name by David Yallop, and it shows that this guy, John Paul I, was a genuine reformer who was trying to clean up the Vatican Bank. He died after 29 days in office. And anybody who knew him, including the magistrates investigating his death, they were all blown up or assassinated within a year. And
wow.
An insider in a book called The Holy Alliance, I don't have the reference here right now, but it's you can see it if you check it online. The author there, an Italian journalist, found out that there were insiders in the Vatican who was telling him that, it was the Holy Alliance that did all those killings. They just covered up the Vatican's dirty laundry. And that's why the John Paul II, who has now been made a saint, his job was to put all the Vatican Bank crooks back into power, and that was his job. And kind of like what Francis is doing now to kind of reverse the stuff that had been coming out.
Yeah, and because he does it with a smile, he appears to be this benign force, and wearing these robes and smiling at everybody, and people fall for this.
Yep.
I mean, I don't understand it. Now, I was looking up Jesuits a little bit, and I was looking at an oath that they swear into, and I find this. I'm sorry?
The secret oath, yeah.
Yeah, I find it quite incredible, and I don't know if it's true, all of these horrible things, which I want to read just a little bit of it, and just please bear with me and tell me if you think this is true or not. It says, I furthermore promise and declare that I will, when opportunity present, make and wage relentless war, secretly or openly, against all heretics, Protestants, and liberals, as I am directed to do, to extirpate and exterminate them from the face of the whole earth, and that I will spare neither age, sex, or condition, and that I will hang, waste, boil, flay, strangle, and bury alive these infamous heretics, rip up the stomachs and wombs of their women, and crush their infants' heads against the walls, in order to annihilate forever their execrable race. This is what I'm reading is part of the oath that they swear into. Is this for real?
Well, in practice, that's exactly what's gone on over centuries. So, first of all, the proof was in the pudding, that it did go on continually. When you look at the history of the Inquisition and the Jesuits' activity in the New World, all over the world, that's exactly what they did. My ancestors had to flee France in 1572 after the St. Bartholomew Massacre, where 20,000 Huguenots or French Protestants were murdered in one night using those kinds of methods. So, it is exactly what's happened in practice. Whether or not the Jesuits themselves wrote that document, I don't think is the issue. Because, there's a lot of forgery and on both sides that goes on, a lot of stuff that, who can say for sure at what point? But we do know that the Jesuits, like any secret organization within the Catholic Church, take secret oaths, and that who they are is played out in practice. So I don't want to, in terms of that document, I don't know if we should get hung up on its authenticity. We do know that they do that in reality. And if it isn't true, the question is, why hasn't any Jesuit ever come out and said, no, it isn't true? Because none of them ever have.
Right.
They've never denied that document, which is interesting, I find.
Well, I think that's proof of the pudding, too, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that pretty much says it right there, the fact that they're not saying anything.
No, exactly. Silence is consent. You're not contesting what people are saying about you. I found that in Canada, too. None of the churches and governments have ever come out and denied anything that we've said about these horrible things that went on in residential schools. Exactly those tortures and everything you just described that you read out, those went on regularly in Indian boarding schools because natives were seen as heretics by the Catholic Church. The Jesuits were the ones who set up most of the Indian boarding schools in Canada. It was a Jesuit model for how you go in and you convert the local Indian chief, and then you line up everybody in the village, and if they don't convert, they're banished or killed. That happened all over North America in the early years. So,
They do it everywhere. The Aboriginals in Australia as well. They're taking off their lands. They're giving clothes and shoes. They cut their hair, force them into school.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
We just, this last week in Canada, there's a big whitewash going on called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, run by the government and churches themselves, where people are not allowed to name names or sue the churches or bring out any of this evidence. It's a real whitewash and very controlled operation. But anyway, the very week that the head of this commission said that there was no evidence that children were killed in residential schools, there was an announcement that came out that some pipe fitters in Saskatchewan had just found 32 skeletons of little kids near a former Catholic residential school in that province. So, I mean, this stuff is appearing. We've documented 28 sites in Canada where there's mass graves, and we actually began to excavate one in Ontario, and sure enough found bones of children, buttons from school uniforms. You know, and the government shut that down quickly, but it's the hard evidence is out there. It's just that, like you say, people don't like to look at this stuff and can't believe that their country and their church did this stuff.
I think this is the greatest obstacle, is being in denial, actually.
It is, but it's hard to deny now because everything we've been bringing out for 20 years is now being proven. And it's just that the ones who did it are in power, so they can spin things any way they like, and they're believed because they're a government or a church, right?
Yeah, a so-called authority, which they are not.
Right.
They're just self-authorized, tyrannical, demented people, in my opinion. Yeah. Wow. Ari, did you have a question?
Well, I just wanted to know if you could tie in, this is getting off a little bit off the main topic here, but I was just curious if you could tie in the Vatican corruption along with the royals, if there is a tie, if you can, help us see that. Well,
there is a direct tie. First of all, the Crown of England, which is really the City of London corporation. I mean, that's when you're saying the Crown, that's what the corporation is. The City of London is a 1 square mile area that, like the Vatican itself, is not under anybody's jurisdiction. It's a separate entity. The Queen needs permission to go in there, and so on. But the Crown of England actually, and the Kings and Queens of England took an oath of fidelity to the Vatican in the year 1213. It was called the Treaty of Verona, where the King John became the legal vassal of the Pope, and that was never annulled. So the Kings and Queens of England are legally subsumed under the Vatican. I mean, that's a fact under English law, and so there's on that level they're tied. They're also connected because the Crown and the Vatican were joint partners in these crimes all over the world. The residential schools authorized. There's like a tag team operation where the Crown would authorize the founding of these schools. The Jesuits would go in and establish these places and use them as a means to kill off a lot of the local Indians. I mean, this went on for centuries. So they're tied by the crime, they're tied financially, they're tied institutionally. And that's why we named both the Queen of England and the Pope as defendants in our case online, the common law court case that people can read at itccs.org.
Interesting. And so where are you with that in that whole process? Where does that stand right now?
Well, we're at the point of saying, under common law, citizens have the right to form their own courts when the normal courts are not defending them. That's a right that goes back over 1,000 years in England. And we're just basing that on traditionally customary law that says these matters are being covered up and ignored by the courts, the Crown courts. And so we had the right to go ahead and bring in our own verdict about this. We had 58 citizen jurors bring in a verdict against the Crown and the Vatican. Now the question is enforcement. And we have international law on our side because there's a thing called the Convention, United Nations Convention on Transnational Organized Crime. And it says clearly that when organizations are involved in human trafficking and money laundering in crimes against humanity, people have the right to seize their assets. They have the right to simply declare their authority null and void. And so we've said to people, well, the best way to enforce this is to take action in your own community. If you know of child raping priests, name them publicly. Some people in England have even gone into Catholic Church and peacefully occupied them and said, this is community property now. You don't have the right to operate in this way without being accountable to the community. So there's a lot of creative ways people can enforce this once they get outside the mental prison of thinking that they don't have the right to do so, because you do, under common law, have the right to defend your children and your communities when those in authority are a threat. And so, we have all the legal basis to do all this. The question is getting people to do it. Now, it's begun to start like Steve and Amy in Kitchener. They've started to do it. There's pockets of people all over that are doing that. And we've produced a common law manual that trains people how to do this. And we're going to have that up online by the end of the month at itccs.org. Yep. And I'll be sure to send you one.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be definitely blasting that everywhere.
Thank you. Yeah, there's groups in the States that are working with us now. America has a good tradition of the local sheriffs have a lot of authority to enforce warrants, to investigate things. And so, we've approached local sheriffs and peace officers to try to get them to work with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
well, now you say peace officers, and what is the difference between a peace officer and a police officer?
Well, police are peace officers. They are accountable to the community. But the problem with cops is that they're trained in statute law, which is, statutes brought in by governments, which are not obligatory on people. Believe it or not, most people don't know this, but just because a cop tells you to do something doesn't necessarily mean it's lawful if you are not posing a threat to somebody. If you are not harming anybody or potentially harming anybody, you're not committing anything wrong. So, for example, on a protest, if you're just standing there handing out information, no cop has a right to detain you or stop you. And if they do that, they're committing a crime. So that's the thing to realize, that we can get police on our side if we just start educating them about that they're not statute enforcement officers. They are people who have an obligation to defend our Magna Carta rights, which are given to us 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, that's why I asked the question, because police officers have two ways of operating, and one is to operate under the laws, the statutes that you just mentioned, or to be a peace officer, which was their original intent of being created, actually.
Exactly. So it's really an exciting time because we're kind of taking us back. We're doing kind of a reclamation. We're reclaiming liberties that have been taken from us systematically, and this is part of the hidden purpose, I think, in what we're doing.
Who's going around and volunteering their time, for example? I'm just asking, or are there committees of people that are actually going in and training these officers? I mean, is anybody doing that now, or is that something that's for the future?
No, we've started doing that. We've started setting up workshops there in America. Oh, you folks are based in America, are you?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, there's kind of three areas now where that's happening. It's happening on the West Coast, in the southern states, where about a third of our citizen jurors in that first court case about genocide in Canada, about a third of them came from the southern states. And so, in that area, there's people setting up workshops, one in Louisiana, one in Florida, and then up in the Northeast, in the New York area. There's a lot of interest in this, and in fact, in New England and New York, we've got a lot of support, not surprisingly, because historically that's where the whole common law tradition in America came from, the Puritan settlers, and their kind of congregational system of church government was the model for the American Republic originally. And so we find that in New England, there's a lot of support for this. I'm going to New York next week to give some talks. And if I should mention to people that if they want to get a hold of me and I can connect you to our different American affiliates, you can email me at hiddenfromhistory1, like the number 1, hiddenfromhistory1 @gmail.com.
And where in Florida are these workshops taking place?
Well, there's one in Fort Lauderdale, and there's one in the Orlando area as well. And I'll be down there after New York, actually, to help coordinate that.
You must come and visit me. I'm close to Fort Lauderdale.
Oh, I definitely will. Just drop me a line and we'll arrange it. Yes.
Yes. Oh, okay, my goodness. One last question before we have to wrap it up really soon. Kevin, what you're doing takes an enormous amount of courage and tenacity and enormous spirit for what is righteous and for what is good, in my opinion. What is it that compels you, and how do you continue to fight this fight for the children and for justice and for goodness? How do you do it?
Well, I'd just say that the short answer is I've felt that I've had to do it. It's just the right thing to do. That I couldn't live with myself if I just kind of turned away knowing what I was learning as a minister that was going on to all of these children. So I think it's simply just what any moral person would do. But it also runs in our family. I mean, we've had a lot of political and religious dissidents over the centuries and on the Annett side of our family, and I think definitely that it definitely plays a role. And I could also say that as I went through a lot of loss and suffering when I lost my own family and livelihood and was blacklisted basically in Canada, I learned a new strength and resolve, the kind of thing that can't be taken from you under those circumstances. So it's in that heat of battle that you kind of find your real purpose and resolve, and that's definitely been the case for me now. So I feel very much stronger now, much clearer than I was before. And I think it's kind of like what Martin Luther King once said, when you overcome your fear of death, you're unbeatable. And that's true. And I find that with lots of people. Steve was another one who was locked up in jail, but after coming out of jail, Steve Finney said the other day to me, I'm more resolved now than ever to take these people on. You know, they've just made me angrier. So, I mean, I think that that's definitely all true.
Wow.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I'm in awe.
Well, let me give folks my websites, too, before I forget. Just to affirm the www.itccs.org. That's the Tribunal website. And then the one which has our film Unrepentant, our documentary film, and a lot of the evidence of genocide in Canada is at www.hiddenolonger.com.
Okay, and the new documentary, Part 2, Unrelenting, or what is that the title? Unrelenting?
That's the title, and we're in the process of scripting it right now, and we're going to feature a lot of people who are doing this work on the ground today, and so looking forward to that, and that's part of what I'll be doing in America when I come down in a few weeks.
Oh my God, I can't wait. I'm going to send that out to everyone I know, and I know I have a mailing list of thousands of people, so I can't wait to get that out too.
Oh, okay, please write to me, and we'll get together when I'm in Florida.
Oh, I will. I absolutely will, because I'm only 20 minutes south of Fort Lauderdale.
Excellent.
Sounds like a plan.
Well, great. Thank you for having me on. I've appreciated the time, and we'll do it again. I'll give you more updates as things happen.
Okay. Ari, do you have any other comments or questions?
Just a quick question. Do you think that this is the last pope? Do you think this is it? I mean, is this the time frame where, humanity has been looking at with all of the scriptures and things like that?
I sure hope it's the last pope. Well, I mean, he's a figurehead, don't forget, and it's the institution, I think, that's the issue, and I definitely see it crumbling from within. So definitely we're seeing the end of an era, and how that plays out, I think it really is dependent on all of us, just to keep educating one another and telling people to protect their children and keep them away from that false church. But anyway, I'm confident that this is happening,
Absolutely. Well, Serena, I think this is a wrap.
Okay. Well, Kevin, thank you ever so much, and you are one of the greatest heroes that I have ever been fortunate enough to witness alive and to talk with, and I'm so happy to be able to share your information with our audience. And I hope they take it and run with it, and please look into the documentary and follow his work, and please help Kevin contribute to taking down these false authorities that are really abusing and hurting innocent children and being just corrupt, demented leaders that we need to really just completely annihilate once and for all. So, okay, everyone, thank you, Kevin. And
thank you very much, also.
And you've all been listening to Shattering the Matrix with myself, Serena, and Ari. Please tune in every Saturday night at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And thank you all for listening once again. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Shattering the Matrix with your host, Ari Kopel and Serena. Please visit our website, 2012emergence.com. That's 2012emergence.com. Find us on Twitter at Matrix Shattered and like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Shattering the Matrix. Listen to archived shows at blogtalkradio.com/Shattering the Matrix. And join us next time for the birth of the new golden era on Shattering the Matrix.